Now, the fourth installment of the state capture report, which deals with Alex Gore, EOH Holdings and the Free State asbestos scandal, as well as the National Treasury, was handed over to the presidency today. It makes damning findings and recommendations. We've gotten used to that. Political analyst Lukhona Mgluni joining us now for more on this and some other good news, which we'll tell you at the end, so stay tuned for that. So, Lukhona, let's talk about this. And, you know, Justice Raymond Zondo was quite damning in this one against the ANC in particular. And I'm going to quote what he said here. The ANC and the ANC government should be ashamed that this happened under their watch. And he's talking about power being handed over to the Guptas in terms of ESCOM and other organizations within government, which he says is worrying and shouldn't have happened under their watch.
Well, the ANC itself had gotten captured, right? And this is why over time some leaders of the ANC have been speaking of those foreign tendencies that have, infiltrated themselves into the movement. Unfortunately, to what Fikile Mbalula likes saying, that the ANC is like the ocean, it washes itself and cleanses itself. It's not been quite able to self-cleanse, because even in the post-President Jacob Zuma era, there are still a lot of challenges. We've seen what has happened with the PPE money. It seems as if we are dealing with a far greater problem than simply shaming the ANC, and whether or not the logic in terms of how the ANC is formed has changed from a very conscious political organization into a very serious, thuggish criminal syndicate.
And, if you read the finer details about the asbestos project, about Nomvula Mokonyane allegedly being involved, recommendations for Matsela Koko and his part at ESCOM also to be probed, it's all quite damning. It all happened under Jacob Zuma's watch. But, he's out there sitting in his Nkandla compound, seeing all of this unfold. And I'm looking for details about Jacob Zuma as the architect of the state capture in the Zondo report. And maybe it'll be in the last final installment. But are we seeing any recommendations, like blatant recommendations I'm talking about, regarding Jacob Zuma and the consequences for him?
Well, let's run the parallel analogy of a criminal syndicate. Often the masterminds are hardly arrested. It is the operatives who are caught on the streets, whether they are dealing in drugs or they are handling sums of money or they are burglaring or, doing a cash-in-transit heist. But the masterminds, it takes a long time to actually draw the lines to them and to actually show without any, fear of contradiction that they were involved and that they are the chief architects of what has happened. So you might take some time to get to that point, but we do know politically that there are significant markers. But it's one thing to see the political significant markers vis-a-vis what could stand before a court of law in terms of saying you want the masterminds of state capture to be arrested, to be prosecuted and eventually convicted. And the first marker, of course, was the landing of the Waterkloof Gupta jet, when then Secretary General of the ANC was so peeved by that, he actually released a statement in the evening. I think it was about 8:30 p.m. And then he went into a National Executive Committee meeting of the ANC, withdrew the statement, fell onto the line and started defending the former president. That's when the ANC, in actual fact, got paralyzed, when as an organization was used to try and, one, shelter the former president, secondly, make sure that there is no accountability and serious probing of allegations of corruption in general, and not just those involving the Guptas. I mean, the upgrades at Nkandla themselves were subjected to gimmicky videos where we were told that a swimming pool is a fire pool and a retaining wall is, I don't know, an amphitheater was called a retaining wall, and all of those things. So yeah, Shehan, there is a direct link, and I don't think that Justice Zondo is being brutal at all to the ANC. In fact, he's being kind. The ANC should be probed. The ANC should pay back money that it benefited from all this wrongdoing of state capture, whether it's the ANN7 and the New Age deals, whether it is, money that flowed through to Chancellor House via Hitachi and the ESCOM deal. The ANC has a lot to answer for, and I think it has not been put on the spot as much as it should be.
Yeah. So let's move on. ANC matters, but obviously the NEC meeting this past Sunday and Monday, there were two things they spoke about, so I have to consolidate this because we don't have much time. Obviously, the disbanding of the ANC Womens League. Let's talk about the clout and importance of this league going into elective conference first, and then we'll talk about the step-aside rule afterwards. But let's start with the Women's League. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, they put it mildly to say the term of office had ended, therefore it warrants. But I think what was curious, not worrying, were the comments made by the Treasurer General, Paul Mashatile, when he was making this announcement to say they are also hopeful that they can appoint a task team that does not have a vested interest in the upcoming conference. Then I wondered that it must be a task team of bishops and not politicians. Because if it's going to be politicians in that task team, they have a vested interest. And it's not just women in the ANC who have a vested interest in the Women's League, as we would have seen how this leadership came into being. The Supra Maumapilles of the world, the Ace Makashules and Jacob Zumas were quite interested in terms of who emerges, because that is a voting bloc at an elective conference at the National Conference of the ANC. So it is important, and I think some who support Batabile Dlamini will probably feel this is a witch hunt against her, and they will look to the Eastern Cape and say the term of office expired for the Provincial Executive Committee, but you simply converted the PEC into a task team. Why don't you do the same with the Women's League? How do you explain these, inconsistencies in the ANC's approach to its structures?
Talking about inconsistencies, it's the step-aside rule, because going forward, if you are facing serious charges and have stepped aside, you can't actually stand for nomination at branch, regional or provincial level. But the other two slipped through the crack. That's Adele Gumede and Mandla Msibi, and they actually got elected to those positions, but have stepped aside now. Some are going to argue that it's unfair, and there are going to be other individuals in other provinces. I was talking to Sipa Mandla about this, who are going to say, hey, this is unfair because, you let them do it. Why can't we? Reputational damage, the ANC says, was one of the issues it looked at when Gumede and Msibi were actually elected to those positions. Isn't it too late for that, especially with this step regarding the clarity on the step-aside rule?
Reputational damage is caused by a lot of things for a party that is incumbent. Us driving throughout the Easter weekend on potholed roads that are belly roads is reputational damage for the things that they should be doing. In fact, I think the ANC is much concerned about internal issues rather than cleaning up its act where it matters the most, where they have responsibility to the public, over the public purse, and delivering services and public goods to society. That's what they should be worried about. I still think the step-aside rule, and I've said this since Nasrec, is a badly formulated rule. It scapegoats what should be done to discipline comrades to toe the line. Now, what happens to a Gumede? Does she not impugn the integrity of the organization simply because she fell through the crack and she was elected? What do you do with her? The ANC needs to start learning dealing with the elephants in the room rather than postponing or kicking the can down the line. And that's what happens when an organization is unable to enforce its own prescripts of organizational discipline, and it creates excuses to accommodate people who it shouldn't accommodate. The organization over time becomes paralyzed.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about the main reason you actually...
Oh, is this the build-up?
Yeah. So that was the build-up. Here's the main reason Lukona's here. You are actually going to have a show on eNCA on Sundays at noon.
Yeah.
Tell us more.
Yeah, so the new show called On the Spot with Lukona Mnguni, between 12 p.m. and 1 p.m. every Sunday here on 403. I look forward to it. I mean, I've been a friend of eNCA, I think, 6 years now, since local government elections, when I was a resident political analyst in those elections and subsequent elections and other events. So I look forward to being on the other side of the table, putting people on the spot. But really, it's not just putting people on the spot, it's putting issues that should inform our national discourse and our national agenda. There's a lot of hopelessness that people feel about the state of the nation. We need to find some voices. Well, we need to deal with the people that have brought us to the place of hopelessness, but we can't wallow in misery forever. We need to start finding ways and pathways to the future for South Africa. And I'll be talking to a variety of people. Of course, we launch on May Day, which is Workers' Day, but I want to really discuss the future of organized labor. Society has become a bit despondent with unions, as you would know sometimes in the stories that you cover. People will blame unions for a variety of inefficiencies in the public service and elsewhere. So I've got a veteran unionist joining me on Sunday.
Okay, you don't want to say who?
Former President Kgalema Motlanthe.
Okay, so you went for a big name for your first show, naturally. And how are you going to handle politicians who don't want to come on the show to answer and to be held accountable? I have that issue a lot on my show, because there are politicians who simply refuse to speak to me because of the way I handle issues with them. You know, that's the reality of South African television.
I've stepped on many toes with what I would deem academic work and political analysis work because the truth is quite bitter for many to swallow, and that is okay. But I do think, Shahan, I mean, I've been quite intimately involved in the media space for the last year and a half. I do think that the media has a responsibility to society to tell, you know, viewers and listeners and readers of those politicians who are simply refusing to account. There are ministers, for example, in government, who don't mind giving interviews and are not selective who they give interviews to. There are those who are selective in terms of who they are comfortable to talk to because they might have certain relations and relationships and therefore they would not be hit hard. And then there are those who flat out refuse to be held accountable. And I think those who flat out refuse to be held accountable, including the president of the country, who barely does interviews, must be called out and told until they are pressured enough and they change their ways.
All right. Well, welcome to the eNCA family.
Thank you.
Good luck with your show on Sunday. I'll be watching. I'll send you text feedback.
Fantastic.
Live
I'll look forward to it. I won't wear a tie as posh as you are, but I'll definitely make a plan.
No, don't worry. I told you, get a haircut before Sunday. I've been giving Lukhona some advice behind the scenes about cutting his hair naturally. You know. Political analyst Lukhona Mnguni there. Now be sure to catch his show On the Spot with Lukhona Mnguni on Sunday at 12 o'clock.